It was the spring of 1969. Deep in the frozen wilderness of the Soviet Union, beyond the reach of Western eyes, a secret unfolded that would never appear in the newspapers. Villages spoke of strange lights over the forests, of thunder without storm, of nights lit by fire. But in Moscow, the reports reached only one place, the desks of the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti, the KGB. At first, they dismissed it as hysteria, a meteor, perhaps an aircraft. But the reports did not stop. On the night of March 17th, radar stations detected something impossible. An unidentified craft entered Soviet airspace from the north, moving faster than any jet, then suddenly slowing, weaving, descending. Anti-air batteries scrambled to track it. Pilots were ordered into the sky. And then, silence. Over the forests of Sverdlovsk Oblast, near the Ural Mountains, a blinding flash lit the night. Witnesses described a ball of fire tearing through the sky, trailing sparks, then a roar that shook the earth. Somewhere in that wilderness, something crashed. Within hours, the military was there. Convoys of trucks, armored vehicles, soldiers in heavy coats poured into the woods. Local peasants were forced back, their villages sealed. Exercises, they were told. But the soldiers carried Geiger counters, protective suits, heavy machinery. This was no ordinary retrieval. At the center of the cordon lay the wreck. Charred trees surrounded a crater in the frozen earth. Smoke curled upward, tinged with a chemical smell. And in that crater rested not a plane, not a missile, but something the soldiers had never seen before. Metallic, curved, seamless. A craft the size of a small fighter, yet unlike any design known to Soviet engineers. Its surface gleamed dully in the firelight, pitted from impact, but strangely intact. No rivets, no seams, no markings, just smooth alloy that seemed to drink the light itself. Officers barked orders. Engineers moved in with cables and cranes. The object resisted at first, as though heavier than it should have been, but eventually it was hauled onto a flatbed truck. Soldiers stood guard, rifles ready, as though expecting the machine to wake. Then came the whispers. Inside the wreckage, they said, were bodies. Accounts diverge. Some spoke of two figures, small, fragile, burned beyond recognition. Others whispered of three, one mangled, two intact. Autopsies would later claim the beings were not human, their skulls elongated, their eyes disproportionate, their ribs fewer in number. But in that moment on the forest floor, the soldiers only knew terror. The convoy rolled through the night, its cargo covered with heavy tarps. Villagers who watched from their windows swore they saw something glowing beneath the canvas, a faint pulsing light that vanished when the trucks passed. Destination, Sverdlovsk. There, under the iron grip of the KGB, the wreckage was delivered to a secure hangar. Soldiers who had touched the craft were examined for burns and sickness. Their uniforms were confiscated, their names erased from records. They ceased to exist. And then, the autopsies began. In a sterile underground chamber, surgeons in heavy gowns and masks stood over a narrow table. On it lay the body of a being no one could name. Its skin was gray, leathery, torn by the crash. Its limbs were thin, its chest collapsed. But its head, the head was intact, large, domed, with eye sockets far too big, and a jawline that seemed almost delicate. Cameras rolled silently as scalpels cut, every slice recorded on black and white film stock. The KGB locked the reels away, cataloged as secretno, classified. Officially, nothing had happened. The crater was bulldozed, the trees cut down, the villagers silenced. For decades, the story never escaped the Soviet Union. But secrets have a way of bleeding through cracks. Years later, in the chaos after the fall of the USSR, fragments of that film surfaced in the West. Grainy black and white reels showing soldiers hauling a strange craft, men in gas masks pulling wreckage from a forest, surgeons dissecting something not entirely human. Skeptics called it a hoax. Believers swore it was the smoking gun, the first real proof of a UFO crash retrieval. And at the center of it all was the night in 1969, when something fell from the sky and the KGB came to collect it. For the men who stood guard in the forests of Sverdlovsk, for the surgeons who held their scalpels over alien flesh, there was no doubt. They had seen it, they had touched it, and they knew they could never speak. But the film remained, a forbidden reel, a glimpse into a secret operation buried under decades of denial. A story that begins not with imagination, but with a blinding flash in the Soviet night, and the shadows of the KGB waiting to erase it from history. The bodies and wreckage recovered in Sverdlovsk were sealed inside KGB vaults. Officially, the incident never happened. The villagers who had seen the convoys were silenced. The soldiers who handled the wreckage were reassigned, their records scrubbed. For 20 years, the story remained a ghost. But in the early 1990s, as the Soviet Union crumbled, the ghost returned. Among the flood of declassified files, stolen archives, and black market reels, a strange film surfaced in the West. Grainy, black and white, with the harsh lighting of a military autopsy room. Men in Soviet uniforms, their faces hidden by masks, stood around a narrow table. On it lay a figure. It was small, child-sized, but unmistakably not human. The camera lingered on its head, large, domed, with oversized eye sockets. Its skin seemed leathery, shriveled, burned. Surgeons cut into it carefully, their hands steady, as though they had done this before. Every moment was methodical, clinical, cold. The film was said to have come from the KGB's most secret archives. No one knew exactly how it had escaped. Some whispered it was smuggled out by a former officer, desperate for money after the collapse of the USSR. Others claimed it was deliberately leaked, a message to the world, or a warning. When the footage reached Western researchers, it ignited a storm. Was this proof of alien life? A real Soviet retrieval of a crashed craft? Or was it an elaborate hoax designed to confuse? The film was analyzed frame by frame. Experts studied the uniforms, the equipment, the language scrawled in Cyrillic on the reels. Much of it was authentic. The autopsy room matched Soviet facilities of the era. The soldiers' uniforms bore genuine insignia. Even the medical instruments were period correct. And yet, the figure on the table divided opinion. Some saw latex and makeup. Others saw flesh and bone. A few with medical training noted details that seemed too precise to be fake. The rib structure, the proportions of the skull, the way tissue reacted under the scalpel. To the public, the footage became legend. It was aired in documentaries, replayed in UFO specials, whispered about on late-night radio. For many, it was the first glimpse of what they always suspected, that governments not only knew of UFOs, but had bodies to prove it. For the skeptics, it was disinformation. Why would the KGB allow such film to escape unless they wanted it to? Was it a psychological operation, a trick to confuse Western intelligence, to plant doubt and paranoia? But to those who had followed the Sverdlovsk incident for years, the film was the missing piece. Witnesses had spoken of bodies, soldiers had whispered of glowing wreckage, and now, on grainy reels, it all seemed real. The timing was curious. In 1991, as the Soviet Union disintegrated, countless files and artifacts were sold, stolen, or lost. Some ended up in Western archives. Others vanished into private collections. Was the KGB autopsy film one of them? Or was it crafted in that chaos, born from fragments of truth and layers of deception? Even today, no one agrees. Some researchers swear they held a copy of the reel in their hands, its film stock old and brittle. Others claim the footage was nothing more than a reconstruction staged by Russian filmmakers in the 1990s. But one thing is certain. Once the images spread, they could not be erased. The sight of masked surgeons leaning over a body that did not belong to our species burned itself into the collective memory. And for those who believed, it was the ultimate proof. In 1969, something fell from the sky in the Soviet Union. The KGB retrieved it, they filmed it, and they hid it from the world. The appearance of the alleged KGB autopsy film in the 1990s was like throwing gasoline on an open flame. Overnight, it became one of the most discussed artifacts in the UFO world. Researchers scrambled to get copies. Television producers begged for broadcasting rights. Skeptics sharpened their knives, ready to tear it apart. At first, the reel seemed to spread freely. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated at conferences, grainy and distorted, but still terrifying. People gathered in dark rooms to watch the pale figure on the table, the masked surgeons cutting with cold precision. Gasps filled the air when the camera lingered on the creature's skull, its eye sockets like black voids. But then, something strange began to happen. Copies disappeared. Researchers who claimed to own the film later admitted it had been taken, or that they had been pressured into silence. A well-known investigator in Europe reported that his copy had been seized during a customs inspection. Another in the United States described two men in suits visiting him, demanding he hand over the tape. He refused. Weeks later, his house was burglarized. Nothing was stolen, except the film. The pattern repeated. Every time the footage resurfaced, it seemed to vanish again, as though someone was quietly sweeping the pieces off the board. Meanwhile, mainstream scientists dismissed the whole affair. They called it theater, a hoax designed to prey on the gullible. Yet even they admitted, if it was fake, it was elaborate. Too elaborate for struggling filmmakers in a collapsing Soviet Union. The uniforms, the instruments, the setting, all were accurate to the time and place. If it was staged, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths. In Russia, journalists tried to track the origins. They spoke to former KGB officers, retired doctors, even cameramen. Some laughed it off. Others refused to answer. A few whispered that yes, something had crashed in Sverdlovsk, and yes, the KGB had handled it. But the film shown in the West was only a fraction, a reconstruction based on real events. The true reels, they said, remained locked away. And then came the deaths. One Russian researcher who claimed to have traced the original cameraman was found dead in his apartment, the victim of an apparent heart attack at 51. Another man, who insisted he had touched the wreckage as a soldier in 1969, died in a mysterious car crash. Skeptics said coincidence. Believers said cleanup. The more people chased the film, the more dangerous it seemed, and the more impossible it became to separate fact from fiction. Was the grainy autopsy footage the real deal? Or had someone deliberately crafted it as disinformation, mixing truth with lies until no one could tell the difference? By the late 1990s, the KGB autopsy had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a reel of film. It was a myth, a legend, a forbidden artifact that symbolized the very essence of UFO secrecy. Whether real or fake, it carried power. People whispered about it in the same breath as Roswell, Rendlesham, and Kecksburg. it had become untouchable. And through it all, one question refused to die. If the KGB really did film the autopsies of beings from another world, where are those reels now? Some say they were destroyed when the Soviet Union collapsed. Others believe they sit in private collections, traded like cursed treasure among the powerful. And still others insist they remain in Russia's vaults, hidden deeper than ever, sealed by a government that inherited the Soviet taste for silence. But every so often, a new still frame appears. A blurred photo, a shaky clip, a copy of a copy of a copy. Proof that the film never truly went away. It lingers like a ghost, impossible to bury completely. And that ghost still whispers of the night in 1969 when the KGB pulled something out of the forest and locked the truth away forever. More than 50 years have passed since that night in Sverdlovsk. The world has changed, borders collapsed, empires fell. Yet the story of the KGB UFO retrieval refuses to die. It lingers in whispers, in grainy stills, in the uneasy silence of governments that never admit but never fully deny. For many, the 1969 incident is more chilling than Roswell. Roswell was fragments, wreckage, rumors of bodies, a cover-up wrapped in speculation. But Sverdlovsk was different. It was filmed. It was cataloged. It was dissected under harsh white lights, and the cameras rolled as scalpels cut. That film exists, or existed, and that fact alone is enough to haunt the imagination. Today, researchers argue endlessly. Some insist the footage shown in the 1990s was genuine, the closest humanity has ever come to seeing alien life. Others call it a clever forgery, designed to confuse Western intelligence during the chaos of the Cold War. A third camp believes it was both, a reconstruction based on a real event, using fragments of authentic footage spliced with staged material, making truth and fiction inseparable. But what matters is not which camp is right. What matters is the silence. The governments of Russia and the United States have both been asked, time and again, about the alleged retrieval. The answer is always the same. Nothing. No acknowledgement. No denial. Just silence. And silence, in the world of secrets, often speaks the loudest. The legacy of Sverdlovsk is not a clear answer. It is a question mark. A reminder that history can be edited, erased, rewritten by those in power. If the KGB truly held the bodies of beings from another world, then the truth of our place in the universe was stolen, hidden from us. And if the film was a hoax, then it still reveals something just as dark. The ease with which governments and agencies can manipulate belief, plant disinformation, and play with human curiosity like a weapon. Perhaps the scariest thought is this: maybe the autopsy was real. Maybe the crash happened. And maybe, somewhere in the vaults of Moscow, the reels still sit, film stock brittled, locked in canisters marked Secretno. Maybe a few men, and only a few, have seen them in full. The complete dissection, the faces of the beings, the artifacts pulled from the wreck, proof of another intelligence, buried not in the ground but in the archives of silence. For those who saw the leaked footage in the 1990s, one image remains impossible to shake. Not the craft, not the forest, but the lifeless figure on a cold metal table, a being that did not belong, surrounded by men who cut and cataloged as if it were a specimen, not a story. That image is burned into the collective mind, real or not. And so, the story survives, not in archives, but in fear. The fear that we are not alone, the fear that our governments know and will never tell, the fear that the greatest discovery in human history has already been made and stolen from us before we ever had the chance to see it. The KGB UFO retrieval is not just a mystery, It is a mirror. It shows us how fragile truth can be, how easily the extraordinary can be hidden in plain sight. And it forces us to ask a question that chills more than any alien body ever could. What else has been buried? The forest in Sverdlovsk is quiet now. The crater is gone. The villagers have died or forgotten. But somewhere, in the darkness of locked vaults, a reel of black and white film may still be waiting. A reel that proves everything. A reel the world will never be allowed to see.